today's episode of Future Says, we have Constantin Gall, the managing partner at EY Germany, as well as the mobility industry practice lead for Europe West. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Constantin, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at EY.
Well, when I started my career, the first project I got was for a German car maker, and that is how it all started. Since then, I was only busy taking care of car makers, suppliers, and so on. And as I progressed through the career, I was given the privilege to run our industry practice for automotive and mobility. Today we call it mobility. Back then it was still called automotive. And we are about 1,100 people taking care of the European continent and in terms of all our clients. What we do right now with them is mainly defining their future kind of unique selling point, business strategy, value proposition, what value pools to play. Are you a hardware firm? Are you a software firm? Are you both? And so it's a very interesting time for that industry. A lot of transformation happening.
Yes, and I think it's such a global industry. Obviously, EY are such a global company. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Europe region has that maybe other regions globally don't have, what the European region doesn't have that maybe the Asian region or the American region does have?
I think the difference, the key difference, and I would kind of compare and contrast mainly the US versus Europe. Europe, it typically takes a little longer. There's more skepticism around some of the innovations, but once they buy into, then they double down. I mean, when you look at Tesla as kind of one of the real groundbreaking on electro mobility and charging and all that kind of stuff and open patents, that is a concept that was not known in Europe. I mean, there it was all about being protective, keeping to yourself, to keep your competitive edge. And they all believed this concept here in the US is going to fail. Obviously, we all know now in hindsight, it didn't. And so I think that is the partnering, the ecosystem thought, that's something that's easier to establish or kind of get across here in the US, in contrast to Europeans. The Europeans are playing catch up on that front. On the other side, when Europeans then commit to something, you can see that the quality aspiration, if I may say so, is still a different one than here. So if we say a car has a certain reach, it has a certain reach. If we say, okay, you can accelerate it 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, you can only do it only once or twice, and then you need to cool down the batteries, but you can do it until the batteries are empty. So you can debate whether that's necessary for a German. Being a German car enthusiast myself, yes, it is, but for others, it might not be. So that is a little bit kind of a cultural difference, and the way how they approach things differs quite a bit.
Sure. And you're having conversations with European automakers all the time, every single day. What are they talking about?
Well, they are currently, I think top of mind is really today, what are we going to be? Are we going to be a hardware provider, as we used to be, so the vehicle itself? Are we going to be a software company? I mean, there is still that quote out there, the vehicle is going to be a smartphone on wheels, which nobody today, if you ask them who gave that quote, nobody was it. Yeah, so it wasn't me, kind of thing. But I think there's a very lively debate right now how to really position a vehicle in an ecosystem where we all pretty much live on our smartphones, irrespective of what brand. You have all your apps there, you have your private life there, and so on. So as the vehicle still is a very significant part of our day-to-day kind of routine, yeah, commuting, getting kids, going to work, and so on. So the question is, am I leaving everything that's happening, especially in light of if autonomous driving really picks up, if some of these more automated driving and car sharing things come more to fruition at a larger scale? What do I do with my client sitting in my vehicle? How can I monetize that time? And that is the very lively debate and the power play, you could almost say, between some existing software providers, between the hardware providers. So they currently really do a little bit trial and error, where to play, where to double down, what are the future revenue pools. And there's different schools of thought. I mean, some say stick to the hardware, to what you always owned, and kind of make sure there is great kind of user experience around the hardware, from buying a car, maintaining a car, and also kind of how to use a car and make it more accessible in the kind of, if you have a car and you drive it only 1 hour a day, yeah, half of an hour commute in the morning, half an hour commute in the evening, in between, and a smart kind of piloted a couple of years back, with an app that you can say, my car is available. You become kind of like a car rental. If I need a car, I can just go there with my app, take your car, drive it around, gas it in, where I use it, insurance and everything is on me, and vice versa. So those things were piloted. They never really kind of picked up yet. You might debate it's a kind of demographic, generational thing, because the older generations that quite often own the car still, they literally like to own the car and they have all their private stuff in there. Yeah. So that's one of the key questions we currently see. And then what are the future revenue pools going to be? So where you're really making money, if you look at an electric vehicle versus a combustion vehicle has a very regular maintenance cycle. So you go to your dealership, you have your annual inspections and so on. There's a lot of touch points where there's monetization happening, where you can upsell, where I can tell you, oh, look at this new brand, and I give you a different offer. So with the EV, that is less and less the case. And the more we kind of merge into the software-defined vehicle, even less the interaction, the physical interaction, human to human, is going to happen, because a lot of what we see is coming over the air overnight. So you park your car in the evening, in the morning you have 3 new features because it was just kind of flashed overnight. So the question for them is, how do I get customer loyalty? So how do I create that stickiness that you're still buying whatever brand you have today, you take the next generation tomorrow? Then as the monetization while you're in the car, that's another one. And then also, that's more on the operational side. An EV is a very, quote-unquote, simple vehicle to build. So you need way less production infrastructure, way less headcount and so on. So that's also a question. What do you do with all that headcount? On the one hand side, I have labor shortage, talent shortage, especially when it comes to IT, engineering. And on the other side, like blue collar, really assembling the cars, they have an excess. So can you retrain? How can you transform your workforce? Not laying them all off and so on, which, especially in Europe, countries like Germany and France, it's a real painful exercise due to labor law, and a very costly one. So you really currently venturing out to strategize what are alternative routes to repurpose that existing kind of asset base that you have, and also the workforce.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the key.
Yeah. I read an interesting statistic recently from the Financial Times that 70% of customers are willing to change brands as they move to an EV for the first time, which is something that I think in Europe especially was quite unheard of. You were a BMW customer for quite a while, whereas now, as they're making this big switch, like you said, customer loyalty, brand awareness, it's changing a lot. Can you talk about that move to EVs in Europe? How is that going? What's the future? What more needs to be done, maybe by governments, for example?
I mean, you have a couple of recent developments. A lot of the EV sales have been fueled actually by the fact that the governments were heavily subsidizing them, as most of the EVs we currently have, especially the ones, except for the French ones, which I think are quite competitive in terms of pricing and value proposition, but the others are very highly priced. So kind of for the average person buying one of these premium brands EVs, challenging, and as many of them decide to go upstream rather than downstream. So they took out the lower range vehicles for the EVs and only have the higher ones. So that's a challenge which allowed a lot of the Chinese incumbents to capture market share there, but also some of the French players or Italian players that have these cheaper, especially for kind of inner city commute, where range anxiety is not such a matter. If you have 100 kilometers, that typically is enough to kind of get you through the day, and then you charge it at home. So that is one thing that we see, why there was a big shift from kind of more the traditional luxurious OEMs to potentially different ones. The second one is the pure availability of vehicles these days is also a challenge. I mean, we came off a huge post. First it was COVID, then it was kind of the Panama Channel and so on, then it was chip shortage and so on. So a lot of the vehicles were not kind of readily accessible. And while you in Europe are used to not going to a yard buying a car, you just walk the yard, say, I want this, and you pick it up and take it home. Typically, we had kind of delivery times, 3 months, 6 months, sometimes 9 months. But if you're near like 24 months, or at the peak time, you could not even order a car because the 24-month delivery was already reached, and would have been even further that the OEM said, I'm not sure whether I'm going to produce that car by that time. Yeah. So that also kind of caused some of these. And last but not least, I think with the advent of electromobility, people, I mean, if you change a very, call it trusted and trained system, i.e. a combustion engine, you know how to fuel it, it's taking you 5 minutes at a gas station, that's pretty much my range. So if you take that leap, yeah, I don't want to say leap of faith, but if you really change your paradigm, use a paradigm, you're not bound to traditional kind of criteria so much. You know, it's anyhow an experiment, if I may say so, and therefore you're more open to also explore different value propositions, different brands, different vehicle types, and that's pretty much what happened. And that is why a lot of the Asian players came into. Also, some American made very nice successes. And if you look at a brand like MG, that is kind of a Trojan horse. MG is still being perceived as a European brand, kind of very traditional British brand. Actually, it's owned by Geely, so it is a very Chinese brand. And so those are the things that we see.
Yeah, as is Lotus, of course, which is another very British brand now
Absolutely.
owned by Geely. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier about whether a car company goes all down the hardware path now and just does that really well as they've always done, or looks at the software. With the move to software-defined vehicles, are there other new entrants? You've mentioned MG. Are there other new entrants who are really taking advantage of a battery-powered vehicle being less complex to manufacture, let's say, than the ICEs?
I mean, what you can see, and you see it with differing kind of rates of success. A ton of Chinese kind of came in, I would say, like 24 months. There was a first wave of Chinese producers, OEMs, coming to the European market. Many of them retreated already. Some of them even filed for bankruptcy. So the thing is, it's not just a vehicle. It's not just software in a vehicle. I think there's three components that you need to keep in mind. European customers pretty much still used to a physical offline retail concept. So the pure idea of not seeing the car, touching it, kind of test driving it, but just having that virtually in the 3D like a video game is not yet resonating with kind of the masses or at scale. So that's one challenge that many of the Chinese have. Second one is if your car breaks down, and I'm not going into the discussion about reliability of certain brands lately. But the thing is, assume your car, irrespective of the brand, is breaking down. You want to be sure there is a dealership or a garage pretty close to pick you up, take the car, and fix it. Not always the case with many of the new incumbents because they don't have the infrastructure. Yeah, they don't have a large dealership network yet. They don't have proprietary, like captive dealerships. Another topic that is, I think, an impediment. And the third one, for sure, is, and that is, again, subject to country by country, it is the entire topic around the now fading away of governmental subsidies at the same time while the charging infrastructure is, and I think that's for the US and Europe the same. There was a first wave of really very rapid setting up new charging grids, scaling them out. But what people forgot is to maintain them. So a lot of these outlets, and especially in the US, you can reach tons of reports and stats. I think almost 25% of the charging outlets are currently out of function or not kind of giving you the full capacity, which then makes it very painful to be an EV owner. So those three components I think you need to keep in mind, and some of them were just not fully reflected when certain people drew up their business cases. And so it's going to be very interesting. I don't see right now in Europe a lot of replenishment of the governmental subsidy programs because they are all fighting national debt. Germany just kind of ceased its program and we don't know where to find the next money. Other nations already suspended it before us. So that's going to be a very interesting question. And the last one is you now have the first generation of customers that comes to the end of, call it the typical ownership life cycle for EVs. You do not have a lot of repeat buyers. So a lot of people that bought an EV are now going back to a hybrid or even a full combustion because of the experience they have. It is not yet sufficiently convenient, especially if you are more on a long distance and not kind of pure metro kind of commuting. It is just painful. If you really have to search for a charging point, that a charging point is not working, you're looking for the next one, and you spend, out of a ride that would take you 1.5 hours, you spend another hour or hour and a half to just choose up your car, then it becomes inconvenient.
Yeah.
And that's something we still see. So it's not that the e-mobility would not work, it's just kind of the ecosystem. It's not yet at a state of maturity that the ease of use and therefore the user experience would be so convenient to say, okay, I'm in there. So a lot of the repeat buyers are more like convicted. They really believe into it and they want to contribute to a sustainable cause or whatever. And so it's going to be very interesting to see in the next 2 years how things unfold.
Sure. I think talking about the next 2 years, we've been speaking about trends, we've been speaking about opportunities, challenges. I'm amazed that we haven't spoke about these two magic letters just yet. But what do you think? Artificial intelligence, AI, where's that going to help?
I think you need to, if you look at kind of 3 dimensions, the one, and that's the one where we see actually the biggest potential right now, I have to say right now, is everything around R&D. So the entire research and development process can be shortened significantly, and it can also be made more simplistic by the fact that AI models help you really to simulate in a different way. So you just can kind of be more rapid in the prototyping, in the kind of getting the mileage, which is in this case a virtual mileage, in to say, okay, something hardware is kind of fit for purpose. Yeah, you proved it. That is one thing. The other thing is combining AI with software as in software-defined vehicles. You can simplify the vehicle. You know, if you have headlights, you can just develop one type of headlight which has a certain hardware layout, and then you can via software decide is it just using a third of its capacity, 50% or 100%, and you can do that kind of pay as a service. You know, if you know you have a long commute, 8 hours between Paris and Hamburg, yeah, you can just in the evening kind of push the button, €5, and you get a full kind of LED, whatever, laser experience. And for your day-to-day commute within Paris, if you're located in Paris, the normal one does. What it does then allow you is the RHP for the vehicle is significantly lower, because you can just, as you need it, yeah, plug in these things. So that's the one thing for AI. The other ones that you
Which,
see,
by the way, is absolutely incredible. I mean, that's so exciting.
It is. And the good thing is, it saves the OEM time to develop. It saves them literally money, because they don't have to develop 3, 5, 10 types of headlights. It's one. And over the air, you can do all of that. And so the more fungible or optional a vehicle becomes, it might become more interesting, especially for the younger generation. Lower kind of entry price. And when you need kind of the premium set, or you think it's worthwhile, you can kind of just opt in for that moment. The second dimension where we see a lot of this is everything with, call it in-car communication, where AI is currently in. And I think that's also what you see right now with all the announcements going on from the OEMs. That is where they push very strongly to get kind of an Alexa or Siri on steroids in the vehicle and have a more natural interaction. I think it's a cute feature. It has to be proven how much of this is really changing the experience. I mean, would a customer be willing really to pay extra for this, or does it increase the loyalty because the ease of use of a vehicle is different? What we see lately is with the advent of a lot of these hyper screens. A lot of people say after a certain point of time using them, I'm too distracted from actually driving, because you know you have all these shifts and sliders and so on. So for some of the very day-to-day, like a seat heating, yeah, or adjusting just the temperature, a lot of people default back saying, I would just like a physical switch to do that. So that is kind of, in this again, 2 schools of thought, and it's going to be interesting which one's going to prevail. Also, again, from a demographic and generational thing. I mean, I think the younger generation is way more used with the sliding and swiping than the older ones. So there I wouldn't kind of yet place a bet left or right. So yep. It's an open-ended. Another one that we see, and that is, again, I think very important, or even more important for electric vehicles, is AI in terms of what we call proactive journey. So if the vehicle really interacts with your Outlook or whatever you use for your calendar, it can predict, okay, you need to be at that time by a dentist. I know typically you do your groceries on Tuesday, but the dentist is on a Wednesday. The time you want to commute to your dentist, it's always rush hour. So rather skip your kind of groceries on a Tuesday, do them on a Wednesday, because there's a grocery store right next door to your dentist, yeah, and you drive half an hour earlier, it saves the congestion time is giving you. So these kind of very predictive, yeah, and kind of assisted optimizing of your journey, of your calendar, of your daily routines, that is something we see really kind of could be a strong use case, as we are all time compressed these days. So if somebody helps you to become smarter and align things in a very intelligent way, that's something where we see and where we also think there's a commercial reason. And the other one is, again, coming back to the charging infrastructure and the fact that it's still patchy. If you really would have like a mission control for an in your neighborhood, the entire charging station, okay, which station is up, which is down, which is malfunctioning, and so on. What are typically the peak hours? And if you are then navigated, with a small detour from your normal route to go there, charge in a short time period, no waiting time, and so on. Again, something I think everybody who had before the experience of kind of driving around for 1.5 hours trying to find a charging point and would appreciate quite a lot. So that predictive journey part is one that we feel is a very strong one. The last one is around the in-car entertainment, like the last screen. Last year, we had a lot of debate who owns the last screen and therefore owns the customer. I think that's, again, a case where you need to see how much AI really can make a difference, because in full transparency, the moment the car makers allowed Android and Apple in the car, be it with Apple CarPlay or similar application for Android, you have your smartphone, you mirror it on a screen, you have everything there. So that kind of redundancy or duplication of apps or whatever in the car, discretionary and on a smartphone, is something where we are currently having some doubts, whether people would be really willing to engage into that, to have an infrastructure that's proprietary to the vehicle and one there, while you have your Netflix account there, if you can mirror it on the screen, or your co-driver, not for you, because you're not allowed to watch while driving.
Yes.
That will be something where we go, okay, show me the use cases where you really think a proprietary infrastructure in the vehicle makes a difference that clients would be willing to pay in the end again.
But of course, for the OEM, they want more of their own systems because they would lose the data and therefore the insights and the information if they...
Exactly. It is all, in the end of the day, it all boils down to who owns the data, who creates the data, and then, and that question is still out there to some degree, how to monetize the data. And I think there are already some ideas where you go, yeah, I can see that, and there are others. And actually, right now, as there's so many sensors, and I think it's a couple of terabytes a vehicle produces over 1 hour of driving. So if we would really capture all that data real time, the server farms that would have to be built are humongous, which you go like, okay, that will not happen. And I think the struggle that quite some of the car makers have right now is to kind of place a bet or to focus or to bring up the discipline, whatever you want to call it, to say, out of the trillions of data points I'm getting, what are the relevant ones and how can I monetize them? Because that's in the end of the day what you want. Preemptive maintenance, predictive maintenance, I said optimized journeys, all of that kind of stuff. And that is, again, I think right now the discussion that is happening in most of the C-suites to say, okay, where do we focus? How much of that is what we're going to do? How much is where we partner? And how much is what we just leave to others because we think they're better position to do it, and or the efforts we would have to put in to play catch up with one of the software giants is just kind of out of proportion.
You mentioned the computation cost of the software-defined vehicles, and as we get more and more data to do some of this computation, need bigger and bigger server farms, let's say, if we go in that route. Are car companies doing enough when it comes to sustainability?
I think they do a lot. They do a lot. You could debate whether they do the best job in advertising what they do. If you look at 2 years back, be it on the IAA in Munich, be it on CES, a lot of the car makers were pretty much centered around circularity and how circular a vehicle is. I mean, sustainability of the material that's going in. There was a lot of man-made fiber out of natural components that you can kind of decompose by 100%. There were first prototypes of batteries that are decomposable by 98%. So I think there's quite a bit out there. Has it already found its way into today's vehicle generation? In parts, because you still have a 7 years typically evolution cycle to build a car. So most likely we will see with the next generation of cars coming in 25, 26, there will be a significantly higher degree of circular components. And what they also do is, if you look at the ESG, kind of the scope 1, 2, and 3, I think the scope one, which is the direct one that it belongs to a car maker, they have a quite good handle on the kind of sustainable energies, material usage, recycling, and everything that they have in their factories and so on. They are now kind of widening the scope to 2 and 3, which means your suppliers and the suppliers to see how sustainable are these things. I mean, if you have rare earth going into a battery, where was it mined? Was it mined in a country where children supposedly are still doing it, or was it mined in a country where you say, okay, I can track it from the source all up the way? And the intermediaries, I mean, how are these components shipped? Is it per air freight? Is it kind of more sustainable, like train, or which would be by far the most sustainable one to do? So those things they are also starting to optimize. The challenge there is all these optimizations as of now are typically increasing their input cost quite a bit. And now you come to the point, how much is a customer willing to pay extra to say, okay, that is the Patagonia of the car makers, yeah, one of the most sustainable ones. So yes, I'm willing to pay a premium of 10, 15, 20% because I know this is a very kind of sustainable product I'm owning. And the challenge we see right now that the car prices are already so high these days, with all the R&D that has to be invested into new kind of powertrain systems, with all the software development going on, there's only so and so much that you can, kind of add on top. And the question now is, as most of these new generation platforms are not running yet at a scale, the margins that the car makers are making are not high enough to sustain all of what they would love to do. So it's not a lack of kind of awareness and insight. It's just a challenge to, in the end of the day, they're still on a commercial undertaking and they need to make some profit sustain business. And I think that will be interesting to see over the next 12 up to 36 months, how that will develop, how customers are really willing to pay. And last comment on that one, if you look at the current geopolitical situation, inflation rates sky high, interest rates sky high, uncertainty in terms of economic. We have a couple of elections coming up, one here in the US. It is a lot of uncertainty, which typically is not favoring customer behavior that is kind of very consuming, in terms of I buy and procure a lot of things, and typically they are more on the budget than on the kind of I do something over and beyond behavior. So I need a new car right now. What is kind of meeting my minimum requirements? That's the one I got to buy, rather than saying, okay, I'm happy at the masses, happy to invest another 10, 15, 20K because it's a very sustainable car. Because I don't know what my private personal future is going to be financially, economically. So that's a very challenging kind of environment within which the OEMs currently are operating.
I mean, I'm completely amazed in this whole conversation. You've talked about so many new things that I feel like if we had this conversation 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have talked about any of these things.
No.
They're all brand new.
It is. And that's what excites me, keeps me in that industry. It's really currently, I think, next to life sciences, one of the most transforming industries. Since the invention of the car, actually, it's a reinvention. And I know we were quoting this already for 1 or 2 years, but it's just exciting. And there's more to come, I'm sure, on that one.
Do the car companies have challenges with having the right skills, adequate staff to accomplish all of these things? Because like I said, 10 years ago, they wouldn't have needed people to do these types of things. Now they do. Do they have the right staff? Are they upskilling, or are they hiring brand new profiles into their companies?
I mean, that is currently one of their biggest challenges. They have, as I mentioned earlier, they have a big portion of the workforce in the blue collar space. They're currently exploring how much of these, or what portion of these people can be reskilled, retrained for what you need in the future. And there's for sure a certain portion that it can do. But at the same time, they really are now fighting and hiring for the same talent as Google and Amazon does. So the question is, what is your differentiating value proposition? Why should you join a kind of OEM in the US or in Europe over, if you're a data scientist, over a Google or an Amazon? And that is currently something where they really try to find their feet. What could be a differentiating value proposition? Because they will never be in a position to kind of keep up on a pure, call it commercial terms. It will be challenging because of everything kind of these other companies are able to offer. So I think if they double down on the purpose, like sustainable mobility for everybody, I think especially the younger generation might buy into that. So I think you need to rather stress some softer arguments rather than a very hard like cash at the end of the day. But it's a struggle for them. And also the other struggle is what they have. I mean, back in the days, they had very, very siloed business units. And all these business units had a kind of a number of kind of software scientists, programmers, engineers, and so on. And what they now try to lift and shift to get scale, because they say, okay, I'm developing an operating system for a group or like GM or Volkswagen or whatever, that should be one, so we can lift them all up. The thing is getting these people now up there in a structure, ring fence them, and really make sure they are operating as one integrated unit and not are still kind of tucked and tied to their legacy structure. That's also a challenge because it's a big change program. It's a big mindset shift that people need to undergo, which I think you can read in the press. Some are doing better, some are not doing so well. But that for sure is a key challenge for them.
Yeah. If we think about the future, on a recent episode of this podcast, we had Luke Julia, who's the Chief Scientific Officer of Renault.
Yeah.
And I think to the surprise of a lot of people, he said, I don't believe in autonomous vehicles as they're publicized. They're not happening anytime soon. There's so many more things that we need to achieve in the meantime. For you, as we think about the future of vehicles, is it still autonomous? Or where are we going towards here? What's the vehicle of, let's pick a number, 2040?
2040. Ooh. That is
2030, whatever you prefer, 2050.
I think the current trend that you see is you can either call it hyper personalization or customization of a vehicle or optionality. I think that is the key area where everybody's going to focus on to say, okay, how much can I modularize a vehicle and how much can I kind of adopt it over its life cycle, so that the car is not as today a steady state, so it leaves factory and then it has a certain hardware infrastructure, a certain software infrastructure, and that's it. It's kind of a set system. What they want to do is now to have an open system that you can kind of change and permutate over time, and I think there we see first very successful approaches. As mentioned, the question is how much of this is so relevant to you and I that we would pay for it. And when it comes to autonomous, I would agree with him. I don't see this also anytime soon to really hit kind of the mass market. There are level 3 plus, and yes, on a highway, you have a couple of minutes where you can do other stuff and so on. That's all working, but you have a ton of regulatory hurdles still in the inner city kind of structure. It's still challenging to effectuate. And then again, the question is, what do people do with the time they gain? And in order to do so, is it a smartphone that you're just kind of going on TikTok, like you had Instagram or whatever, or is it something that you interact with the vehicle, which the car makers would love you to do, because that would mean they get an additional revenue stream. So I think that is where we see a lot. In terms of powertrains, you've seen the latest developments in Europe. I mean, at first they last minute introduced e-fuels for the taxonomy, which until 5 minutes before inking was out, so it came in. Then they changed the entire EU7 emission legislation. No, you don't need to change the combustion engine anymore. It's just vehicle tires and brakes mainly focused. So you can see everybody, I think, comes a little bit more to the realization it is not progressing as fast as we would love to full kind of going out of combustion into e-mobility. And I think there's different use cases. And for me, like everything like inner city kind of commuting or traffic, perfect match for e-mobility. Long distance, I'm not sure whether that is really the smartest, unless you kind of redo it with these how do you call it, overland lines where you literally like a tram, have you, that might work. But for others, we see more hydrogen or e-fuels being relevant. So I think it is not as black and white as we were all believing like 3 or 4 years back. And so for me, the most interesting questions really after 20 35, are we still selling combustion engines? Yes,
Yes.
or no?
And
So that's
your prediction?
I say yes.
You say yes. Okay.
We will meet then and see whether I was right or not.
Last question. I when I knew I was going to meet you, I looked online and I saw that you'd given 3 pieces of advice for leaders, and you'd said they need to be brave, they need to look at the bigger picture, and they need to be transparent and authentic. Do you stick to that? Is there anything else you would advise for leaders out there in the automotive space that have all these different things they need to think about now while still focusing on their objectives?
I think one that I would love to add now is be open-minded in terms of really what is it that you should be doing, what is it that others should be doing, and what is it that you should be doing together. And I think that kind of joint, the collaborative spirit, if I can call it that way, that is something, especially where the Europeans need to double down on. So to really say, okay, what part of the value chain or an ecosystem do I own? Where do I play it with others, and where do I leave it to others? Because otherwise, I think in a fast-paced environment that we are currently in, you will die the death of 1,000 cuts otherwise.
Well, Constantin Gall, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it, and look forward to talking in 2035, seeing if your prediction
Excellent.
is right.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.